Well, thanks for joining us today. This is Talking Politics in Western Pennsylvania. Now, this program is very long because, in fact, it deals with our national leaders and the situations actually they've gotten us into. And being a social studies teacher, when I look at this stuff, I get irritated because of the fact that sometimes they lead us down a path that we don't even know about until the history tells us about it. And this is going to be the history that tells us. Okay, so we're going to get moving right ahead here. You'll have to excuse me because I have to read a lot of this stuff because, as you see, there is a lot of information. Let's look back at the political issues over the past 30 plus years. As you see there on the right, the Clinton administration, Bush, Obama, Trump's first term, Biden, and the 100 years plus, or 100 days plus. Clinton's 2 terms. Let's see what problems he has caused us. The Clinton-era blunder that set the stage for the Ukrainian crisis today. Instead of working towards a new and inclusive European security order, Clinton expanded NATO over the objections of prostate Russia. During that decade, Russia was on its knees, and the economy has shrunk by 40%. While unemployment was surging and inflation rocketing, as it is now, by the way, it reached a monumental 86% in 1999. The Russian military was a mess. Instead of seizing the opportunity, Clinton, in fact, and his foreign policy team squandered it by deciding to expand NATO, threatening towards that country's border. Such a misgotten policy guaranteed that Europe would once again be divided, even as Washington created a new order that excluded the progressively alienated post-Soviet Russia. Clinton fires government employees. Clinton initiated a cut over 377,000 employees in just 1990s. The total number came to over 428,000. And you know what? I try to remember if I heard anything really about it when the media picked that up, and I can't remember that. It wasn't such a big thing. So whenever we look at this today, let's compare it to what is happening at this point. It is true that during his presidency, Clinton reduced the federal government's workforce as part of the initiative called National Partnership for Reinventing Government, or NPR. In March of '93, just 2 months into his presidency, Clinton announced creation of the NPR, led by Vice President Al Gore. Its goal, according to Clinton's announcement, to make the government more efficient and to change the culture of our national bureaucracy away from complacency and entitlement towards initiative and empowerment. Clinton gave nuclear capacity to North Korea. Nuclear blackmail. The 1994 U.S. Democratic People's Republic of Korea agreed framework on North Korea's nuclear program. In 1993, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea refused to let international inspectors see whether it had secretly separated plutonium for bombs. Subsequently, negotiations led to a 1994 U.S. DPRK agreed framework that stopped the North's plutonium production, but at heavy political and financial cost. The 1994 agreement and its background are the subject of this paper. The United States will supply North Korea with 2 large nuclear power reactors worth more than $4 billion. And as I said in the very beginning, this is going to be a situation where these issues that were caused years ago are causing us still problems today. Clinton lays the foundation for the housing crisis. Lawrence Kudlow and Stephen Moore argue that the financial crisis and recession are caused by policies Bill Clinton implemented that were designed to stop discrimination in housing loans, known as redlining, in poor areas. In particular, they argue that the Community Reinvestment Act, IRA, legislated in '77, was to blame. Under Clinton's Housing and Urban Development Secretary, Andrew Cuomo, Community Reinvestment Act regulators gave banks higher ratings for home loans made in credit-deprived areas. Banks were effectively rewarding for throwing out sound underwriting practices and standards and writing loans to those who were at high risk of defaulting. What's more, in the Clinton push to issue home loans to lower-income borrowers, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac made a common practice to virtually end credit documentation. Low scores were discarded, and income and job history was also thrown aside. The phrase subprime became commonplace. What an understatement. Tragically, when prices fell, lower income folks who really could not afford these mortgages under normal credit standards suffered massive foreclosures and personal bankruptcy. This was a major problem. We had a home down in Virginia, and out of that entire marketplace, there were approximately 40% of the homes that in fact went into foreclosure under these programs. Freddie Mac and that were in fact given the opportunity to have the federal government pay out all of those failed loans because they had approved them. All right, once again, these are all things that are still affecting our mortgage rates and that today. So when we look at this stuff, we really have to paint with a very wide brush over very many years. Excuse me. Though Bill Clinton ran on presidency promising empowering workers in office, he gutted welfare and passed NAFTA, undermining organized labor and driving working class voters away from the Democratic Party. And we're still living with the consequences of that today. What did get passed was North American Free Trade Agreement. Though it was not most economically consequential, the authors argue that it remains the most political and ideological toxic issue pushed by Clinton, a political blunder of the first order that opened up an opportunity for the Republicans in the 1994 midterm election and alienated a large segment of the working class who, as Lichtenstein underscores, eventually became a significant proportion of today's Donald Trump supporters. Although Northerners were the most vocal opponents of NAFTA, it hit the South hard than the North. No demographic in the United States shifted more decisively to the GOP in 1994 than Southern whites, particularly those whose education ended with a high school degree or less. Ironically, NAFTA's impact on U.S. employment was not great. In the two decades after the trade bill was passed, just 40,000 jobs were lost each year, a very small fraction of the nation's larger job churn. In contrast, Mexican employment in agriculture tripled in just 4 years to 762,000 jobs. Of course, we can't forget the Clinton-Lewinsky scandal. That there's things that happen in government that just can't be forgotten. And of course, according to Monica Lewinsky, she was the first one who was ever criticized online. And in fact, there was a lot to that. Well, he was held, but he was not taken out of office. The Democratic Congress that supported him chastised him to the point where they slapped his hand, he was fined, and they let it go, and he finished his term. This is especially important to me, is the fact that, once again, having been a teacher, I look at this and you'll see under Clinton 1993 to 2001, the bars underneath that time frame, the gun shootings at schools were relatively small. Of course, when I graduated from Peters, we never expected our friends to be carrying guns into school to be, and if you did, you were going hunting afterwards. But anyhow, each president, I have a slide like this to show you how these have taken place over the years under these different administrations. Let's look at George Bush and the problems that he caused. The false premise for going to war. On September 28, 2002, President Bush proclaimed the Iraqi regime possesses biological and chemical weapons. The regime has long-standing and continued ties to terrorist groups, and there are al-Qaeda terrorists inside Iraq. Just over a year after the terrorists attacked New York and Washington, the president and his administration used these two fears, unconventional weapons and terrorism, to win public approval for going to war in Iraq. But the premises proved false. Bill Gray, a congressman of Pennsylvania, when I was down at the Pentagon during this period of time, pulled me aside and said, Congress voted to support Bush without even knowing what he was doing. They had no clue the real purpose that we were going to war. Okay, and as you see there, the truth in early 1970s between Kissinger, the U.S., and the Saudis made an agreement that the U.S. dollar would be the petrodollar. And so if Saudis sold their oil, it would be in U.S. dollars, which made the United States currency the reserve currency of the world. Okay? In return, the U.S. would protect militarily Saudi Arabia. You know, it seemed odd to me that that would take place and that Bush would proclaim otherwise. Why didn't he just say the truth? Biden destroyed this agreement that we had with Saudi Arabia whenever he stole Russia's $300 billion. Once again, they had money, billions of dollars, because they had to, in fact, buy their oil or sell their oil for dollars. They couldn't use the ruble. They couldn't use any other currency. They had to use the dollar. So they had tons of dollars that really boosted their economy. But once again, Congress not understanding the fact of international law, whenever he went to and decided, because of the Russians attacking Ukraine, he decided to hold their money. The problem is, we're not sure where it is right now. And that seems to be a problem. But as you see at the bottom of the screen there, this whole thing that Biden did was caused the BRICS to be found. That was Brazil, all these countries, China, Russia, all these countries to get together and start using other currencies, which now left countries like China with billions of American dollars that they didn't have to spend, that are now, we'll see coming up later on, they're buying farm properties in America. Those farm properties just happen to be near military bases. And Biden allowed 30,000 military-aged Chinese into the country during his tenure. So you see how their issues cause us problems today. Hurricanes expose FEMA woes. The Bush administration demoted the Federal Emergency Management Agency from a cabinet position down to a part of Homeland Security, led by appointees who proved unprepared for the destructive 2005 hurricane season. James Witt, the director of FEMA during the Clinton administration, was widely credited for revigorating the troubled agency. Witt had previous experience in disaster management. Michael D. Brown, President George W. Bush picked for the job in 2003, did not, nor did other key members of FEMA's top management after 2000. Under Brown, the federal agency connection to the state and local partners faded, undermining cooperation and preparedness. When Hurricane Katrina and Rita struck the Gulf Coast in 2005, the response from DHS and FEMA was, by many accounts, slow and disorganized. Victims stranded in their houses drowned as the floodwaters rose, and evacuees languished in the Louisiana Superdome. FEMA later drew sharp criticism from both Government Accountability Office and Congress for its muddled chain of command. A single individual directly responsible and accountable to the president must be designated to act as the central focal point to lead and coordinate the overall federal response in the event of a major catastrophe. The GAO wrote in 2006, neither the DHS Secretary nor any of his designees, such as the Principal Federal Officer Brown, filled this leadership role during Hurricane Katrina. We're still having problems with FEMA today, but for other reasons. Well, still their slow response, but that's beside the point. The utter failure of George Bush's No Child Left Behind. The education reform movement that started with George W. Bush No Child Left Behind law is dead. It died because every strategy it imposed on the nation's school had failed. Excuse me. The reformers relied on the business idea that disruption is a good positive. I call them disruptors, not reformers. Reformers have historically called for more funding, better trained teachers, desegregation, smaller class size. The disruptors, however, banked on a strategy of testing, competition, and punishment, which turned out to be ineffective and harmful. Congress passed Bush No Child Left Behind law in 2001 based on his claim that there had been a Texas miracle. Test every child every year in grades 3 through 8, he said. Reward the schools where scores went up, punish those where scores did not. And great things happen. Scores rise, graduation rates increase, and the gaps between the racial groups get smaller. We now know that this was empty talk. There was no Texas miracle. But every public school in the nation continues to be saddled with an expensive regime of annual standardized testing that is not found in any high-performing nation. Once again, the politicians really should go back to school themselves. Under Bush, the Securities and Exchange Commission laissez-faire attitude towards regulation of investment banks is widely believed to have contributed to the depth of the current economic crisis that we had in 2004 through 2008. That the SEC was asleep at the switch on a clear display in March when its chairman, Christopher Cox, declared he felt a good deal of comfort about the investment bank's capital cushions. Just 3 days later, Bear Stearns collapsed and was bought by J.P. Morgan in a hastily arranged deal backed by $29 billion in taxpayer funds. The sale of Bear Stearns, one of the most first rubbles in the financial earthquake, was passage by 2004 SEC decision that loosened capital rules and allowed brokerage units to take on greater debt. Since then, investment firms' debt-to-assets ratio have risen. In Bear Stearns' case, it was as high as 33 to 1. Simultaneously, in 2004, the SEC began outsourcing risk monitoring to the banks themselves, while assigning only 7 staffers to oversee the 5 largest investment houses, which controlled more than $4 trillion in assets. Despite the company's vanishing cushion against investment, the SEC did nothing in the case of Bear Stearns to address the bank's issues at heightened risk. As the SEC Inspector General put it in September, it is undisputable that the SEC failed to carry out its mission. In that case, the public has ended up footing much of the bill. Once again, we go and you see the Bush 2001 to 2009. They rose during that period of time, then they fell. Okay? And these were the shooting incidents at the schools. Let's look at Obama's 8 years. Barack Obama was a foreign policy failure. For starters, Obama was persuaded to escalate the war in Afghanistan in 2009 in a pointless surge that was doomed to fail and did. Second, Obama and his team mishandled the Arab Spring. They also underestimated the ability of violent extremists to exploit power vacuums in failed states and the resilience of the authoritarian regimes in place like Syria or Egypt. The administration also blundered when it decided not to participate in the China New Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, and then found that even close allies like Britain and Israel were ignoring U.S. pressure and eager to join. But in foreign policy, Obama's record was mostly one of failure. Neither the state of the world nor America's position in it is stronger today than we were when he took office. And I'm not going to read all of this because it's a lot of writing, and I'll leave it up here for a second or two. But Obama's consistently underestimated the challenge posed by the Putin regime. His foreign policy was firmly grounded in the premise that Russia was not a national security threat to the U.S. In 2012, Obama disparaged Mitt Romney for exaggerating the Russian threat. The 1980s are now calling to ask for the foreign policy back because the Cold War has been over for 20 years, Obama quipped. This breezy attitude prevailed even as Russia annexed Crimea, invaded eastern Ukraine, intervened in Syria, and hacked the Clinton campaign in the DNC. Obama's response during these critical moments was cautious at best and deeply misguided at worst. Obama, confident that that history was on America's side, for the duration of his time in office, underestimated the damaging impact Russia could achieve through his asthmatic means. Let's see what our tax dollar had been spent on under Obama. Let's get down to the second paragraph there. According to 2014 Special Inspector General of the Troubled Assets Relief Program, the government had lost $11.2 billion, and in its rescue of General Motors, the United States spent $50 billion to bail out GM. Now that was 2014. Let's see what GM did with the money. As the magazine Cadillac, General Motors opened a Cadillac factory in China on Thursday to target the country's growth but crowded luxury car market. The 8 billion yuan, 1.2 billion American dollars, factory operated with the main Chinese partner. They will have the capacity to build 160,000 vehicles a year. Now, if you notice the note down below, the company, General Motors, has currently about 58,000 employees in China, compared to the 100,000 they had in the United States. Although its U.S. employment level is significantly less than it was with 217,000 employees. The chairman of General Motors called the Chinese factory the crown jewel in General Motors' crown. Now, once again, we spent billions to get them out of debt and to basically pay for the union's votes, and here they spend it in another country. Obama spent billions trying to fix the school, just like everybody else. All these government officials think they're going to do something. The Obama administration spent billions to fix the country's worst public schools and accomplished virtually nothing. According to the government analysts of the program, the U.S. Department of Education released the results of its study in a single largest government spending program to improve failing schools. We're talking about millions of kids who are assigned to these failing schools, and we just spent several $1 billion promising them things were going to get better. School improvement grants were launched by President George Bush, but the budget soared under President Obama. His administration poured $7 billion into the program between 2010 and 2015, with the money going to the states to distribute to schools with lousy graduation rates, poor math and reading test scores. Now let's see what that led to. Now, schools could get $2 million per year for 3 years if they played ball with one of Obama's administrators' recommended measures that supposedly would make it better. Now, if I didn't know better, I would think that This would be a Republican trying to bring these things up. Replacing the principal and at least half the teachers at each school. Converting into charter schools. Undergoing a transformation which would mean hiring a new principal and adopting instructional strategies, new teacher evaluations, and a longer school day. The Education Department did not track how the money was spent other than to keep a record of which of the strategies schools choose to implement. Once again, we're still in these problems today.
Two days before the Obama administration ended, its Department of Education released a report showing the administration's most expensive education initiative had failed, badly. The school turnaround program was meant to dramatically improve the nation's lowest performing schools. The Obama team sent billions of dollars to the struggling districts running the struggling schools. This is the foundation of countless previous local, state, and federal school turnaround efforts. This final report found that the schools that got the money, when compared to similar schools that didn't get the money, saw no improvement in test scores, in high school graduation rates, or college attendance. None. Yes, billions in taxpayer dollars were squandered, but more importantly, millions of low-income kids are still assigned to persistently underperforming schools. Now, the new federal education law encourages states to use new approaches to this problem, and the Trump administration is pushing school choice. But whatever we do, remember, the future of millions of disadvantaged kids is at stake here. Great schools and great educators can do so much. We just have to do something differently. To learn more about my take on education reform, check the links in the description below. Also, let us know what other topics you'd like AEI scholars to cover in 60 seconds.
Okay, all right, well, we're just about the end of this period, so we're going to stop there and pick up with Obama's green energy failures as soon as we come back. Thanks for coming back. We're going to continue our program. We were looking at the issues under President Obama. Okay, so we'll start with Obama's backed green energy failures leave taxpayers with a $2.2 billion tab. And this was found by the Washington Times. Go down to the second paragraph there. Nearly $1 billion in loans have already been defaulted under the Energy Department program, which included the infamous Solandra stimulus project and dozens of other green technology programs the Obama administration had approved, totaling nearly $30 billion in taxpayer backing. The Government Accountability reported in its audit. Okay, once again, a lot of this is more of the redundancy, talking about the same thing. The green energy, it sounds great, but we'll see what happened here recently in Spain whenever the program closed down. When we talk about this Solandra program, it was odd from the very beginning. The shareholders and executives of Solandra fundraised for and donated to Obama administration to the tune of hundreds of thousands of dollars. And they got a very large chunk of their money back whenever they, in fact, asked him for supporting their program. For a little context, in the big money world of presidential fundraising, he is among the 560 elite fundraisers for Obama, though not in the top tier, who gathered upwards of $500,000 each. Obama referred to Solandra alone in an October 6th press conference as a loan guarantee program that predates him. That's not accurate. It's true that the energy policy of 2005 created a loan guarantee program for clean energy companies developed innovative technologies, but Solandra's loan guarantee came under another program created by President Obama in 2009 stimulus for companies to develop commercially available technologies. Obama's Princeton classmates, top executive of the firm that built disastrous Obamacare website after being awarded a no-bid contract. I think that we all heard about this program, that these were friends of Barack Obama and Mrs. Obama, and all of a sudden they got a total contract for $678 million, no-bid contract to build a website. Okay, the problem with that, of course, is very simple. If the government divided that amount of money by the 328 million American citizens, they could have given each American citizen in a medical account $2 million, which would have outdone the need for Obamacare. Let's look at Obamacare real fast. 5 broken promises that Obamacare made. You can keep your plan. That wasn't true. If you like your health care plan, you can keep it. And PolitiFact, which is in fact have come lately as a big supportive of the Democratic plan, called it the lie of the year for 2023. The second promise, you can keep your doctor. And that was false. Obamacare website revised and then dropped the section titled, "Can I Keep My Own Doctor?" Promise number 3, your premiums will go down to $2,500. And actually, the premiums increased by 60% over the first 4 years. Insurance premium amounts varied an increase from $2,524 for an individual between the ages of 31 and 40, and $12,040 for a family headed by someone over the age of 60. Promise number 4, you have more access to care. Hundreds of thousands of healthcare providers opted out of Obamacare exchange. Studies show that instead of going to the doctor's office for care, people continued to use the emergency room for non-emergencies. Broken promise number 5, those with pre-existing conditions will be protected. And that did not happen, period. All right. The insurance companies, in fact, found that there was no reduction in mortality of those participating in Obamacare that enrolled in other insurance programs. So that wasn't anything that really should have been looked at. Let's look at what happened since Obamacare. The Affordability Act disruptive change in primary care delivery, which expanded access to primary care for millions of new patients, physicians, and policymakers faced increased pressure to solve the perennial shortage of primary care facilities. Historically, the United States has fluctuated between projection physician shortfalls and surpluses. With the passage of the ACA, the nation will face a physician shortage in the coming decades. Overall, this is interesting. Physicians experienced the largest loss over the last 3 years, with 117,000 physicians departing the field in 2021 alone, followed by nurse practitioners with almost 54,000 and physicians' assistants with almost 23,000 departures. These are people who left, so you're adding more people onto the marketplace, but you have less people for them to in fact see. More than 700 rural hospitals are at risk of closing. Local hospitals that were or are in trouble include the Washington Hospital that was bought by UPMC and helped them out. The Heritage and Independence, which had just made the news recently in Pittsburgh and are shutting down. The original 10-year cost estimate for Obamacare, made in 2010, was $940 billion. The Congressional Budget Office updated that figure to $1.8 trillion for the periods between 2012 and 2022. By 2018, when the law was fully implemented, the total expense were estimated to be closer to $2.5 trillion, which was approximately 3 times the amount that Obama promised it would cost. How is it that Obama deported 3+ million illegals, but no one called him a racist? He was even called the deporter-in-chief. And I'll tell you why. It wasn't because Republicans didn't want people to notice that President Obama was being tough on illegal immigration. In fact, they were still complaining about not being tough enough. This was before the Democrats decided to flood America with illegals to assume that they would be kept in power after they'd pay for their housing and their transportation and everything else. They would vote for the people who brought them in, i.e. the Democrats. Oh, sorry about that. Okay, like every other part, during Obama's care, you see the shootings at schools went down significantly, okay, which was a really good thing. Okay, we'll look at Trump's first term and see what he did, okay. The average interest rate year to year under Trump was 2.46%. Not the 9% that you heard under Biden. Okay, when the COVID pandemic hit, it was brief, but in fact, it cost the American government $2 trillion in aid, relief, and economic care, the CARES Act, in an attempt to provide relief to individuals and businesses that lost their business. Trump's stand on public education. President Donald Trump sought to significantly expand school choice, which in fact, if you remember, back when we talked about Obama and his program with education, he was talking about school choice and extending it. Slash K-12 spending and tear down the United States Department of Education. And this is his first term, while pouring fuel on the K-12 culture fires. The office lost nearly 14% of its staff between the end of Obama's administration in 2017 and the midpoint of the Trump administration started in 2019. Morale was down throughout the department, a report by the Government Personnel Office found. Still, both programs supporting effective instruction, state grants or Title III, currently funded at nearly $2.2 billion, and the 21st Century Community Learning Center program, currently funded at more than $1.3 billion, are still on the books. So are the dozens more programs Trump sought to eliminate. Immigration policy. Trump's first term, the immigration issue was a big thing back then too, and he was trying to close the door, build the wall, if you remember. The hallmark promise of his campaign was to build a substantial wall on the United States-Mexico border and to force Mexico to pay for the wall. Trump has also expressed support for a variety of limits on legal immigration and guest worker visas, including a pause on granting green cards, which Trump says will allow record immigration levels to subside in a more moderate historical averages. Trump proposed regarding H-1B visas frequently changed through the presidential campaign, but as of late, in July 2016, he appeared to oppose the H-1B visa program. And if you're not familiar with the H-1B visa program, it is a program that, in fact, requires you to go out and find somebody who has whatever unique skills that you may need. For example, if you had a manager of a concert organization, if you couldn't find that person in your local area, then in fact you had the right to ask someone to, in fact, who was outside the country to come in and perform that task. A lot of this was used in the technical areas of computer operations and things like that. We found that most of our computer operations are run by foreigners now. Okay, most of our computer operations in the United States have folks in India or China working for them because of the fact that those organizations, one, cost a whole lot less than our employees, and two, come up to the same standards that these folks need. Now, they may not be in this country, but the person who, in fact, oversees them, if you were running a company and you didn't have someone who met that requirement, that would give you the opportunity to have someone come in on an H-1B visa. But you had to supposedly exhaust the marketplace and prove to the government that you couldn't find that person. Trump's stand on crime, okay? As he called it, the American carnage. The crime in gangs and drugs have stolen too many lives and robbed our country of so much unrealized potential. The last time a president addressed rising crime in his inaugural address was in 1997, then when crime near historic peaks at 4,891 offenses per 100,000 people. President Bill Clinton spoke of the need to help reclaim our streets from drug and gang and crime, so that our streets will echo again with the laughter of our children, because no one will try to shoot them or sell them drugs anymore. You know, it's always, I have a hard time understanding why, even in Pennsylvania House, they are trying to push to legalize marijuana whenever science has proven that that marijuana is a gateway drug into other things. And but it's like they're surrendering to the war on drugs, and which is very disheartening for a parent and a person who's involved in things like that. The House of Representatives votes to adopt the articles of impeachment against Donald Trump. The Democratic-led U.S. House of Representatives delivered the historic rebuke to Trump on Wednesday afternoon, exactly 1 week after his supporters stormed the U.S. Capitol building in a rampage that led to 5 deaths, including that of Capitol officer. The articles of impeachment charged Trump with incitement of insurrection. Okay? The 10 Republicans that voted in support of that, in fact, either lost their election or decided not to run or retired from politics. What's interesting about this is the fact that this was a Democratic-led House that brought these charges against him and impeached President Trump. Now, if you remember, whenever Clinton had his affair with Monica Lewinsky, the Democratic House decided not to impeach. So it's just, Trump's a Republican, they're a Democrat. Clinton was a Democrat, they were a Democrat. It's funny how laws seem to change depending upon what party you're part of. Okay, as we see here, school shootings started to rise under Trump. Okay, and this is something that is very disturbing because of the fact, once again, when I went to Peters, we used to bring our shotgun into school with us, and we went hunting after school. That's before the Earth's crust cooled, of course. And it's just really quite sad that, in fact, that we have these instances taking place. But anyhow, that being what it is, we're actually going to stop there. Okay, we're going to stop there because we have another second half of the program, which will take longer than the time we have available for this program. So we will thank you for coming back. Please check in on the second part of Talking Politics in Western Pennsylvania, talking about our previous leaders and what they have done that are causing us effects today. Thank you.